Welcome everyone to Supply and Demand Chain Executives Educational Webinar, Risk Mitigation 1. This is John Yuva, editor for Supply and Demand Chain Executive and Food Logistics. This is SDCE's third educational webinar for 2018. Speaker and registration info on our remaining events shown here are available on SDCE's website at www.sdcexec.com/webinars. You can also find archived educational webinars from 2017 on that page as well. We have three expert panelists today to lead our discussion on risk mitigation. Bernard Gore, VP Sales and Marketing for One Network, Vicki Holt, President and CEO for Protolabs, and Kimberly Rodriguez, Supply Chain Risk Associate for BSI Supply Chain Services and Solutions. Kimberly is filling in for Tony Pelly today. Our educational webinars are interactive, roundtable discussions with only a handful of slides. We encourage the audience to submit questions and comments throughout the hour, which I'll pitch to Bernard, Vicki, and Kimberly. Let me know if there's a particular panelist you want to address when you submit your question. Finally, if you need to refresh your viewer, just hit the F5 key. Risk is inherent to global supply chains, manifesting in a variety of ways. Identifying risk in your supply chain and preparing and planning accordingly is critical. Today we'll be discussing best practices for analyzing and mitigating supply chain risk. Today's event is segmented into three parts, with each of our presenters sharing specific aspects of risk and risk mitigation affecting supply chains. Kimberly will begin our discussion with a macro view of supply chain risk and working with suppliers. Vicki will follow with risks specific to manufacturing companies and major macro trends to consider when developing a risk profile and mitigation strategies. Bernard will conclude with an examination of supply chain digitization and the criticality of one single version of truth across your supply network. Kimberly, let's kick things off.
Thanks, John. So in this part of the presentation, I'll be talking about taking a macro view of assessing and mitigating global risk. So first, it really is a question of when is the best time to assess risk. And what we found with our clients is that usually when we're asked to assess the risk in their supply chains, it's too late. Too many companies are stuck in a reactive stance where they're reacting to different risk factors as opposed to taking a more proactive stance. And we've found that in a lot of these companies or a lot of the clients we work with, knowledge of supply chain risk is very tribal in that knowledge of what goes on in the supply chain and who is managing what is unevenly spread within the organization. So there's really a need to move towards a proactive assessment, which could be in the form of audits, and to work this into the procurement process to form better relationships with suppliers, and even not just with suppliers, but with internal teams as well. For example, it doesn't really work if your procurement team is making separate decisions from your finance team, from your operations team, from your sustainability team. Like all of these players need to come together, as so this knowledge is not, as mentioned earlier, tribal. It's also important to take existing knowledge from the organization to formalize it and to really create a systematic internal process. And this can include assessing internal stakeholders, just like the different functions I mentioned earlier. And this will usually spread across a number of groups. Again, we're thinking about sourcing, procurement, logistics, risk management, operations, supply chain, etc. And it's very helpful for companies to map supply chain risk responsibilities internally. And this is more important than thinking about individual risks or even their own supply chain. It's a very people-centric exercise that each company needs to do internally to really have a good understanding of the risks that their supply chains face. And then once these internal responsibilities are mapped out, you can then take a more external perspective and conduct a more external process of mitigating your risk. For example, developing a method to assess the criticality of your suppliers. Are there suppliers that are more relevant or would have a heavier impact on your supply chain if they were subject to certain risks, for example? Or are there suppliers that maybe you can prioritize later on? So we tend to see it as a one-sided risk assessment based either entirely on risk or entirely on criticality / volume / the size of the supplier. So it's really important to take both into account to make a 3D risk assessment, as we like to call it. And a simple mapping exercise can really help here. The next point is really to talk more about modeling, because It's common for many companies to think that modeling can answer all of your questions. And yes, modeling is very helpful, and it can provide a lot of benefits for this risk mapping exercises, but it isn't the end-all solution for managing supply chain risk. The situation will always exceed our expectations and forecasts. And it's really critical for companies to train their suppliers, especially the ones that you've assessed or the ones that you've targeted as being high risk, to better react to different situations. And it's more crucial, this training is more crucial than actually modeling different possibilities out. And as much as possible, it's important to build this kind of training and this kind of reactive stance into contract language if it's at all possible. You should have a business continuity plan, IP protection, etc., to be clear and straightforward with your suppliers as to what they can expect from your business relationship. So it's really important to move towards an all hazards preparation. Next is we want to talk about scaling. Scaling is important in that you should consider how you'll manage your current programs and processes moving forward. You shouldn't design a process that only works for you or only works with a small group of your suppliers. It's important to think long-term and to think about how you can scale your current methods into the future, whether it's through audits or self-assessments. This is why it's important to build risk mitigation into a management system that is not ad hoc to the current problems you're facing. So self-work can help, and different platforms are available out there. But again, what's more important is the process and developing a good understanding within your internal and external stakeholders as to what is expected. Don't substitute technology for process. I think in today's day and age, it's very easy to fall into the glitziness of certain platforms, certain services. And yes, while they can really help your team in developing these assessment methods without the proper process in place, it would just be very difficult to really create a holistic risk mitigation process. So our last point is that it's truly resilient organizations learn quickly from their mistakes. So EHS, or environment, health, and service style thinking, is helpful here in that you can easily look for near misses. And again, this goes back to my point about being more proactive as opposed to being reactive to different risk methods. It's important to build a feedback loop that incorporates those learnings back into the management system, and to ask your suppliers what they're seeing, and then designing forums for their feedback. Industry groups and outside help can also fill out these learnings from different incidents. So again, in looking at assessing and mitigating risks from a macro perspective, what's really important is to take into consideration the different people and functions involved internally and externally, and developing a systematic process to be proactive against these risks and not just relying on negative events and technology to bring your company forward. And that's all I have for today. So John, I'll give it back to you.
Thank you, Kimberly. We're now going to transition over to Vicki, who will be discussing risk as it relates to a manufacturing environment. Vicki?
Thanks, John. And it's really a pleasure to be here with you and your audience today to talk about risk in the supply chain. And I think Kimberly did a great job kind of giving an overview of how companies can run and drive a risk management process within their companies. What I'd like to do is kind of change gears a little bit and talk about the manufacturing space and some major trends that are occurring in manufacturing that supply chain leaders need to keep in mind, particularly as they work to support their company and their product lines globally. Manufacturing is in a very exciting place right now. You hear it called a number of things. Some call it manufacturing 4.0 or industry 4.0 or digital manufacturing. But we're in a major change going on in manufacturing, where you've got software and information technology that's combining with hardware, creating tremendous opportunity for companies to deliver more to their customers and to take waste and cost out of their processes. It's also a risk if companies don't take advantage of the digital revolution and manufacturing 4.0. They might find themselves kind of behind the eight ball with competitors disrupting their marketplace. So there's some things that manufacturing 4.0 is causing in the marketplace as well, and creates opportunities that supply chain leaders need to consider. And I've got three major mega trends I'd like to point out. The first major mega trend is that product life cycles are getting shorter and shorter. Many companies report 30 to 50% of their revenue is from products that are launched in the past 3 to 5 years. You used to have the day where you would have the cash cows out there that are 8 to 10-year-old products. That's not the case anymore. Products that are not innovated and brought to this digital world that we live in today often become obsolete. So in that world where you've got very short product life cycles, I like to think that in addition to manufacturing 4.0, there's something called product management 4.0 that's out there. And that is a different way that product managers need to look at managing the life cycles of their products. They first must consider that every three to 5 years their product becomes obsolete, so they have to innovate more frequently. That has implications for a supply chain leader. It has implications both in terms of the time that you want to spend in product development. If you can reduce that cycle time for bringing products to market, that is faster time to revenue, faster amount of time that they can respond to the customer's needs. So that has to do with sourcing of prototypes and bridge tooling and the kind of scale up that you would have with a manufactured product. In addition, with shorter product life cycles, sometimes supply chain managers must kind of rethink the economics of their supply chain. And instead of getting saddled with a lot of very expensive upfront tooling that might take 8 to 10 years to amortize and depreciate across a life cycle of a product, you might have to look at a way to manufacture and tool and scale up a product that might only have a 3 to 5 year life cycle to it. So that's going to change some of the economics for the supply chain leader. So 2 big points there. Again, getting to market fast is going to be critical in a short product life cycle, and changing the economics of a product life so that they can iterate in a very agile way is going to be a difference as well. The other thing that I think that supply chain leaders need to think about with product management 4.0, and I don't know if any of you are familiar with the software development tool called Agile Software Development, but today in product management, we're actually seeing more of what we call Agile Product Development, where the product manager or the innovator designs what's called the minimal viable product. What's the minimum that I can get out there and get in front of my customers and have them working with that product, and then iterate and make it better and better and better each time. That, again, is going to fuel shorter product life cycles, as you may get a product out in the marketplace and learn from your customers of things you want to change, and then you have to go ahead and change that tooling and iterate it within 1 to 2 years of launch. That's happening more and more in today's digital connected world. The second major megatrend I'd like to mention is Internet of Things. Today, with hardware and software combining in one tool, product managers and innovators are looking at ways that their products can do more for the user, become more of a service, collect data, process data, actually where the product is being used. This is an engine for growth. This is an engine for innovation. But it's also one that supply chain leaders need to think about as they're sourcing products of the future. They also can be thinking about how some of these connected devices and connectivity throughout the supply chain actually may provide opportunity for productivity improvement in delivery and supply chain management. So as we connect a digital thread all the way from innovation through to procurement, through a supply chain, and through a manufacturer's finished goods, there's opportunities for connectivity with the Internet of Things to drive productivity improvement. And the third major megatrend I'd like to talk about is personalization and mass customization. Today, people want the product that works for them and their individual use case. Therefore, the actual number of finished products that go into a specific application is going to get smaller as we customize products for smaller and smaller user sets. That's also going to require supply chain managers to rethink economic paradigms around low volume production and life cycle management. It means shorter runs for things that have to become economical. It also means unpredictable demand. As you get more and more products out there for individual smaller universe of consumers, you're going to have more volatility in demand. How do you manage that volatility in demand? And there are digital models out there to help do that. So mass customization and personalization is the third major megatrend. And as I look at those megatrends and what it means for supply chain managers, speed becomes the new currency for successful companies today. Manufacturers have to learn how to do fast turnaround times for iterations for new products, but also have to deal with shorter and shorter run sizes, shorter and shorter runs in manufacturing. And the opportunity that exists for manufacturers today is to digitize. Protolabs is the world's largest and fastest technology-enabled digital manufacturer. We supply customers, manufacturers, with custom prototypes and on-demand manufacturing services in as little as a day. And we do that by reinventing manufacturing and then automating it with software. We do that for injection molded tooling, injection mold parts, CNC machine parts, and 3D printed parts. And many companies in the digital space now are finding new ways that we can connect and we can automate and scale our processes in order to be able to provide the kinds of services that manufacturing companies and supply chain leaders need today. So I encourage, as you look to mitigate some of these risks, that manufacturers look to partner with suppliers, leveraging some of the new technologies that are available today to expedite processes that they're working through, safeguarding their supply chains from the volatile uncertainty of demand as you mass customize products. Also looking through how products are brought to market and iterated very quickly to prevent unseen problems. And I think also using data that's collected throughout the supply chain to prevent disruptions in supply and also to recover quickly when you do have an incident in supply. So I think overall, manufacturing 4.0 and the digital revolution is a tremendous opportunity for manufacturers, but every function needs to get involved, including supply chain, in making sure your companies are ready for this revolution and that your company is able to capitalize on the opportunities that provides. So those are my comments, John, and I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you very much, Vicki. And we're now going to shift over to Bernard, who's going to talk about supply chain digitization and having a single version of truth across your supply network. Bernard, take it away.
Thank you, John. I want to thank you, first of all, for the opportunity to be on this panel today to talk about risk in the supply chain. Thanks again also to Kimberly and Vicki for their very informative remarks. Again, my name is Bernard Gore, executive at One Network, and I've had the opportunity over my career to deal with risk and safety solutions in industries such as food and beverage as well as oil and gas, and we'll bring that forward in my remarks today. So, first of all, I've got 5 remarks I'd like to go through today. The first one is around the definition of supply chain risk management. If you actually look up the term on Wikipedia, the definition offered on Wikipedia is that the goal of supply chain risk management is to reduce supply chain vulnerability via a coordinated, holistic approach involving all supply chain stakeholders, which identifies and analyzes the risk of failure point within the supply chain. You realize when you read and understand that definition that supply chains today are not architected to enable supply chain risk management. Why is that? Is because most traditional supply chains are built by connecting enterprises point to point multiple times over across the entire network. They're operated based on disconnected silos of information even within one enterprise, let alone across enterprises in the network. And therefore that has a significant impact on the ability to share information in real time, which is critical to avoiding incidents and minimizing their consequences. The only way to achieve the goal of a coordinated, holistic approach involving all supply chain stakeholders is by deploying a connected end-to-end digital supply network that promotes a single version of the truth across all parties and tiers in that supply network. That applies across functions within an enterprise, especially if the enterprise is decentralized across a number of different countries or sites. It also applies to all the parties, all the enterprises that make up the network across all the tiers in the network. So you cannot resolve or eliminate risk in the supply chain unless you adopt an end-to-end digital supply network that allows all parties on that network to have access to a real-time single version of the truth of all the events occurring in that supply network. That's point number one. Point number two is, how do you make that happen? The only way to make it happen is by digitizing your supply chain. The definition of digitization is very simple. It's the ability to share high-fidelity, real-time information across all the stakeholders in the process. It has to be information of high fidelity, meaning that the information is not being corrupted as it moves from one party to the next. It has to be real time to enable parties to prevent and or mitigate the consequences of risk incidents. Risk in the supply chain, again, is primarily caused by the lack of accurate and real-time information being shared across all the participants in that extended supply network. And again, this is caused by information silos, disconnected systems that are used in traditional point-to-point supply chains. If today you're in, for example, the food industry and you're facing a food recall, it's not rare for companies to take days to be able to trace back the origin of a product, if not weeks. In today's day and age, this type of performance is not acceptable. You're going to need to be able to trace the source of a product within seconds or minutes to be able to minimize the consequences of that food safety incident. So once again, risk can only be reduced by ensuring that all companies on the supply network share a single version of the truth, which can only be achieved by deploying a multi-party, multi-tier digital supply network that enables shared multi-party, multi-tier supply chain processes, shared data, and shared metrics. That, by the way, fits very well in the concept that Vicky talked about manufacturing 4.0, or what I would extend to Industry 4.0. The whole concept of Industry 4.0 is based on digitization, which means that the information across the entire network has to move forward and backward without delays, without frictions, without inefficiencies. So that was point number two, supply chain digitization. Point number three is the point about transparency and traceability. The old standard in some industries was to consider that you had done your job in terms of transparency and traceability if you adopted what was called the +1 - 1 standards. In other words, companies only needed to ensure traceability -1, which is from their direct suppliers, and +1, which is to their direct customers, assuming that everybody else connected point to point across the entire supply chain was going to do their jobs, and that therefore risk was going to be eliminated by making that assumption. Well, that is not good enough anymore. The new norm is that whichever role you play in the supply chain, you need to achieve transparency and traceability across the entire supply network, from origin to destination, or in the food industry, from field to fork, as the expression goes. So once again, transparency and traceability will reduce or even eliminate risk. If every agent in the supply chain has access to real-time, high-fidelity information that allows them to react and prevent risk and incidents or mitigate their consequences, you will significantly reduce the risk in the entire supply chain. And a way to do that, again, is by deploying a digital supply network. So that point number 3 was, how do you make transparency and traceability happen across the entire supply chain? Point number 4, you have all heard about blockchain as the new standard in terms of the ability to build truth across an entire network. Blockchain simply consists of immutable records shared as a decentralized ledger across all computers on the blockchain. The blockchain is obviously a very important technology for the mitigation or elimination of risk across the entire supply chain, because it promotes risk reduction by promoting trust in the fact that all the records on the blockchain are immutable and verified. So it will promote trust, it will reduce risk, but it also needs to be adapted to the demands of supply chain. Blockchain was invented in FinServ, first of all. It is being brought over to enable supply chain workloads, but it has to be amended and upgraded to enable ensuring risk elimination or mitigation in the context of supply chains. So in our point of view, you need to combine the advantages of blockchain in the form of trust and immutability and decentralization of the ledger with the advantages that networks can provide in terms of scale, velocity, standardization, synchronization, and optimization. Many companies that are looking at deploying blockchain realize that not everything they do will be posted on the blockchain. Blockchain, if you look at it as a standard, is weak in terms of scalability. Why? Because every record that gets posted on the blockchain has to be verified by all the computers on the blockchain. So what we are promoting is a combined system that enables companies to manage both their off-chain and on-chain activities in a single supply network deployment. We call that a network orchestrated blockchain setup, where a network orchestrator can manage the entire process, and in accordance with the multi-party shared process managed across all the supply chain participants, determines what is kept off-chain and what is posted and verified to the blockchain. But it's all managed as a single instance, promoting end-to-end visibility and a single version of the truth across all the on-chain and off-chain components of the blockchain deployment, thereby reducing risk and promoting trust. The whole purpose of a blockchain-enabled network orchestrated digital network is to increase trust, reduce risk, increase agility, increase velocity, and obviously increase transparency of all the supply chain transactions end to end. Some tests have already been run by some companies across a number of industries, for example, determining that you're able to significantly reduce the time it takes to inspect where a product came from, literally reducing it from days or weeks to a matter of seconds. So if you can actually understand where the product came from all the way to the farm, for example, in the context of risk in food safety, if you can do that in seconds, you're able to either eliminate the risk or mitigate the consequences of that risk. So point number 4 was blockchain. Point number 5 is the need to use a tool called the bowtie safety diagram. And John, if we could move to that slide. This is a slide and a diagram that I've used across a number of industries as part of my risk mitigation and safety projects. This diagram is very simple to understand. In the middle of it, you have the event or the incident that you're trying to prevent, or the event that you're trying to mitigate in terms of consequences. So what's very important on the front end of the event is to put in charge all the control measures that are tied to all the identified threats and potential causes that may cause a hazardous event or an incident to occur. Once again, what is very important on the front end of it is to be able to have complete visibility of all the data across the entire supply chain, end-to-end, in real time, tied to the identification of the potential threats, so that you can prevent any risk or hazardous event from occurring in the first place. The only way you can do this is by deploying, again, a single version of the truth across all the supply chain participants in an extended end-to-end network, so that they can prevent that safety incident or that risk from happening. So that's on the left side of the diagram. The right side is if this hazardous event occurs, you need to be able to minimize the consequences of that event. And for example, in the context of recall management, that means that if you're able to understand the root cause of an event within seconds versus weeks, you're able to greatly minimize the consequences of that event. The only way you can actually get that information shared across all the participants in the supply chain in seconds versus days and weeks is by ensuring that everybody has complete visibility of the digital information based on their permission on this entire end-to-end supply network, and that even they're able to potentially take advantage of intelligent agents who can either deliver recommendations to the users or make autonomous decisions to eliminate or mitigate the consequences of that hazardous event. So once again, the best way to prevent safety events or risk events and minimize their consequences is by ensuring that all supply chain events are tracked in real time across all the tiers included in the end-to-end supply network. All those supply chain events can be tracked against states, milestones, and thresholds. Alerts can be generated against any deviation, and actions can be taken in real time against these alerts to prevent safety incidents or minimize their consequences. And I'll say it one last time, the only way you can achieve this is by making sure that you share a single version of the truth across all the participants in the extended network to allow them to make the right decisions in real time to prevent risk from occurring or minimizing the risk, the consequences of those risk incidents should they occur in the first place. So those were my 5 points: how to achieve supply chain risk management, how to deploy supply chain digitization, how to achieve transparency and traceability across the entire network, how to leverage network orchestrated blockchain solutions, and how to leverage the bowtie safety diagram to implement a holistic safety and risk program, both on the front end and the back end of hazardous events. With this, John, I will turn it back to you.
Thank you very much, Bernard. We'll now transition to the Q&A portion of our event. If you have questions for our panelists, please submit those now. Let's look at our first question. This is a general question to all the panelists. How can technology be used to minimize risk via transparency and tracking, and what tools can be used for reacting rapidly to minimize risk?
I can jump in and just give an example of how we do that at Protolabs. So I love Bernard's guidance to digitize your supply chain, because it's something that we really work hard to digitize, not only our supply chain, but our whole process with a digital thread that starts with a 3D CAD electronic file that's uploaded to our website. And then we actually take that digital thread all the way through and translate the information into what's necessary to actually manufacture that part digitally. And then we actually like to also connect with our customers in a digital way by connecting with their supply chain with digital inspection reports and being able to create that single moment of truth around what is that part that's actually being received. We also have to digitize going back to our suppliers as well. In the aerospace market, for example, the customers demand complete material traceability all the way back to where the mineral is mined and when it's first produced. And so we have to connect all the way through, not just to our customers who may be our suppliers who may be making a block or a rod from which we mill or machine a part, but actually back to their suppliers and where the original metal is being made. So, and they need to know that also in a matter of minutes. If there's an incident in an aerospace product, they need to know immediately what the whole history is of that particular part. And we have to take it down to a part level. So literally every part has to have barcodes for the incoming block that's used to make that part, and then also connect back to our supplier of the block has to be barcoded with who's supplying the metal into that block, and it's all connected digitally. So if a customer has an issue with a part, we can tell you right away where that metal came from.
All right, thank you, Vicki. Another question revolves around sustainability. Where does sustainability fit into risk management, into the risk management framework? And is the supply chain risk management an element of sustainability, or is sustainability a part of supply chain risk management?
I've got a point of view. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I've just got a point of view. First, I'm passionate about sustainability. I think it's got to be every business person's responsibility to find more sustainable ways in which to operate. One of the most important things I think supply chain managers can do when thinking about sustainability is eliminating waste, eliminating obsolescence, eliminating scrap. And you do that with excellent planning. Make sure you're not over purchasing materials and you're buying just what you need when you need it. And eliminating those waste elements.
Yeah, this is Bernard. I totally concur. A lot of companies, when they're connected point to point across the entire network, suffer from information that is either late or inaccurate, and therefore they have to build safety in their calculations. For example, building inventory, building lead times, and all of that adds to waste. So the only way to achieve sustainability is to allow companies sharing a single version of the truth to optimize their operations, which means optimize the sourcing of raw materials and components, optimize manufacturing operations, optimize outbound operations, minimize the use of working capital for inventory, minimize costs. So you minimize empty miles by ensuring that you don't have expedite shipments and the like. So not only does a single version of the truth across a connected network minimize costs and reduce risk, it also eliminates or minimizes waste, which directly, obviously, reinforces sustainability.
Thank you, Bernard. Another question, if you identify alternate sources or second sources, do you regularly buy from them to keep them engaged?
I could jump in again. I mean, at Protolabs, we often have multiple sources. I think it's really important from just in terms of managing we have just an on-demand manufacturing model, and we have to respond very, very quickly to our customers' demands. Again, having to ship custom parts in as little as a day. So we have to have enough diversity among our supply chain in order to be able to do that. On the other hand, there are certain parts of our process we really like to standardize as well. We manufacture custom parts, but our process around which we do it is extremely standardized. So we've kind of standardized non-standard manufacturing, so to speak. And so therefore, there's certain things in our manufacturing process from an equipment point of view that we do like to standardize upon in order to give us the efficiencies we have. So it is a trade-off. Ideally, in an ideal world, you'd always have multiple sources of everything. But in some cases, particularly within our process itself, we have gone with single supplier situations.
Okay. And Vicki, this question is for you. Can you give an example of how a company uses Protolabs to handle shorter product life cycles?
Yeah, I'd love to. And actually, I'd like to give you a couple of those because it depends on the use case. So one is an example of a very large global medical device manufacturer who started using us just within a large department for prototyping, but then the leader of that department spent the time to really get to know Protolabs, and in so doing determined that if that company used us across all their prototyping and what they call their engineering build phase before it goes for FDA approval, that they could take 6 months out of their time to market. So in fact, they completely rewrote their product development process around Protolabs' digital model in order to take time and waste out of it. So that's one great example. Another is an example of a lighting company that has to customize many of its lighting solutions for retailers or large real estate owners. And as they do that customization, first they need to innovate quickly, so they use us in the development of that product. But generally then it goes to more higher volume production where it makes sense to buy very large multi-cavity steel tooling. But that takes time. It can often take 4 to 5 months to get tooling made. So they use us for what's called bridge tooling so that they can actually get out to market, begin fulfilling the customer with a low volume on-demand solution. So that's another use case. And a third use case in terms of time to market is a company that manufactures a consumer type robot solution. And they got their first robot out there very quickly with low volume production, and actually discovered 1 year after it was out in market, the consumers were having quite a bit of problem with it. And then they reinvented it and reinvented again the following year. So they're now on their 4th iteration, and they've got a really good sustainable product that's out there that has been really developed in part because the customers gave them the feedback of what they needed to do to make it perfect. So those are 3 kind of examples of how we help customers get product to market quickly.
All right, thank you. Another question asks, what are some of the challenges companies are having in digitizing their supply chains?
Well, I'd love to hear Bernard. I'd love to hear Bernard.
I can take that one. So again, the definition of digitization is very simple. It's the ability to share real-time, high-fidelity information across all the stakeholders in the extended end-to-end network. So what are the challenges? Well, first of all, what's very important is to realize you cannot achieve this with enterprise systems that are inherently disaggregating the supply chain into silos. What you need is to be able to deploy a digital platform on top of and integrated with all the enterprise systems across all the participants in that network configuration to allow that information to be shared in real time without friction, without delays across all the participants in the supply network. So the first recommendation to eliminate the silos and promote real-time, high-fidelity information to be shared is to deploy a digital network platform that can be deployed on top of and integrated with the enterprise systems of the various companies. And that will allow everyone to benefit from visualization of all the supply chain events in real time, exception-based monitoring, collaboration, real-time issue resolution. It can even be pushed further by leveraging intelligent agents on that network platform to now be able to intelligently, within the execution layer, start offering recommendations to the users in terms of next best action, and even automate those recommendations in the form of real-time decisions, bypassing the human element. And the point there is to convert to an autonomous supply chain, which by definition will reduce or eliminate risk by making real-time decisions that are managed by those intelligent agents to minimize risk and maximize the value of the decisions. So what are the challenges? Simply, we believe that the only challenge is to understand that if you want to achieve digitization of the supply chain, you cannot do it using the traditional point-to-point supply chain paradigm. The challenge is to understand that you have to deploy a multi-party, multi-tier digital supply network platform that can connect the dots, connect the disconnected silos, and enable the information to flow forward and backward across the entire network without frictions, without delays. If you do this, the rest, as the technology is proven and has already delivered value to a lot of companies. And then on top of that, if you adopt the blockchain standards on top of that digital platform, you've got the benefit of both worlds, where we can also promote the immutability and trust of the verified records on the blockchain.
Yeah, Bernard, I love that answer. Yeah, I'd love to just to build on that, because I'm with you. The more we can get the supply chains to digitize, the more they can take advantage of all of the technologies that are available out there. And I'll just give you a great example. We, with our on-demand manufacturing service, our injection molding service, we launched a full suite of inspection services, one of which is a digital inspection service, where we take the part that we made for the customer and we scan it and we pull data right from their CAD, and we create a heat map that'll show exactly what the manufactured part is and how it compares to the original CAD design, and digitally generate an inspection report for the customer. And you get so much information, and then that can all be transferred digitally right into the supply chain network of the customer for their single transparent source of truth. And I've actually been incredibly surprised that we have not gotten as much adoption of our digital inspection report as I would have thought. And what we find is that even though product development is taking place very much in a digital world, where with 3D CAD being basically the standard, once you shift over to supply chain, I'm finding many of our customers are still in a 2D world, working off of a 2D drawing, working off of spreadsheets and checklists. And I really like what you said, because it's almost what you say is just go do it. The tools are available. The benefits are there. just do it. And no company's too small, in my opinion, to be able to take advantage of the digitization efficiencies, the efficiencies that come with digitizing the supply chain. So I love your answer.
Well, thank you both. And here's our final question. Does digitizing of the supply chain increase risk due to cybersecurity?
Yeah, this is Bernard. The answer to that is absolutely not. And the reason for that is that when you're digitizing your supply chain and sharing records on that digital multi-party network platform, everything that happens on the platform is encrypted based on state-of-the-art encryption standards. Everything is, from data in motion to data at rest. All the records are encrypted, number one. Number two, the security model is such that only parties, you can define for each of the parties on the network what they can see and do within the context of that shared process and shared data. And that is defined in accordance with the party that's managing that network. So we've got very strong security, first of all at the encryption level, but also at the security level from a user access perspective that ensures the security of the information on that digital network.
Yeah, I think I'll just add to that. I do think that cybersecurity is a very, very real issue. And I think, Bernard, your solution with using a lot of encryption and identification of what those most important objects of data are and making sure they're protected is absolutely critical. But I don't think any of us can take our guard down. We take cybersecurity very, very seriously because we handle all of our customers' IT in the form of their CAD files. And but we're constantly working at it. I mean, you're never done. You've got to be very vigilant in how you're both managing the external world as well as your internal employees' world and what access that they can get, as well as the use of tools like encryption. So I think there are tools out there, but it's something that all of us in the digital world have to be very aware of and take very seriously. And I don't think we're ever going to be done. The bad guys are out there and always trying to find new ways. So you have to be very diligent.
Thank you,
The
Vicki.
benefits far outweigh the risks, in my opinion, though.
Absolutely. I'd like to thank our panelists today for an engaging discussion, and thank you to our audience for joining us for today's event. Any questions that we were unable to answer during our live event will be addressed by our panelists via email. In addition, an archived version of today's event will be posted on SDCE's website at www.sdcexec.com. Our panelists today have been Bernard Gore, VP, Sales and Marketing for One Network, Vicki Holt, President and CEO for Protolabs, and Kimberly Rodriguez, Supply Chain Risk Associate for BSI Supply Chain Services and Solutions. This is John Yuva, Editor for Supply and Demand Chain Executive and Food Logistics. Have a great day.